The lamp is low. The rain has paused. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticks past midnight. Welcome to the late reader. Pull the blanket up. Let the dark settle in. Tonight, we read old horror by a single light until sleep finally arrives.
I met May the summer I got sent to live with my uncle in Long Beach.
I was 24 and freshly useless, armed with a degree in history and no real interest in using it. My uncle had a house on the coast, a sagging Victorian with a porch that smelled like salt and old wood, and he let me stay there while I figured things out. What I mostly figured out was that Long Beach was too small for a movie theater and just large enough for trouble. There was an old ruined fort at the edge of town, built during some war nobody remembered, and kids smoked pot in the tunnels and spray-painted the walls with the names of bands I'd never heard of.
The beach was narrow and gray, and in the evenings the fog came in so thick the streetlights looked like lanterns underwater. It was the kind of place where time moved differently, where a person could convince themselves that real life was something happening elsewhere.
I met May at a community garden behind the Presbyterian church. She was on her knees in the dirt, replanting marigolds, and when she looked up at me, there was a smudge of soil on her cheek and a kind of startled brightness in her eyes, like I'd caught her doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing. Her older sister, Charlotte, ran the garden and sold vegetables at a roadside stand on weekends. May lived with them and their mother in a small cottage on Fern Street, a place so covered in ivy you could barely see the windows.
Within a week, I was stopping by the stand for tomatoes I didn't need. Within a month, I was walking her home along the seawall. And by August, I had convinced myself I was in love.
It wasn't hard to do. She had a way of listening that made whatever I was saying feel worth saying. She laughed at my bad jokes. She wore cheap sundresses and cardigans that were always a little too big. And when the wind came off the water, she would pull the fabric tight around her shoulders and shiver in a way that made me want to put my arm around her. We spent whole afternoons doing nothing, sitting on the damp sand, exploring the fort, eating French fries from the shack near the pier. We talked about the future the way people do when they have no idea what the future costs.
A little apartment somewhere, a dog, a kitchen with good light. I had no money and no prospects, but with her beside me, those things felt like details we could sort out later. We weren't in any rush. She was barely 21, and I was still pretending I had time to become someone worth marrying. We didn't announce an engagement, exactly, but there was an understanding between us, loose and golden, the kind of promise that feels more like weather than like words. We would wait until I had something steady.
My uncle had pulled a favor from a college friend, and in September I started as a junior logistics coordinator at a firm in the city. It was a nothing job. Spreadsheets, invoices, phone calls to truck drivers who hated me, meetings where I nodded at things I didn't understand. The pay was enough for a studio apartment with a radiator that clanked and a view of an air shaft. I had never been good at practical things, and every day I felt the city wearing me down, smoothing me into someone smaller and meaner.
Most of all, I missed May, but I was too proud and too tired to admit that the missing was what made everything else worse. By December, I was brittle. I snapped at a cashier over a credit card charge. I let a week go by without calling my mother. When I drove down to Long Beach for the holidays, I told myself I was doing it for May, but the truth was, I wanted her to fix me. I wanted her to be bright enough to burn off the resentment that had been collecting in my chest for 3 months.
She wasn't bright. The first thing I noticed was how thin she'd gotten, the way her collarbones pressed against the neckline of her sweater. She was polite and careful with me, and that carefulness made me furious in a directionless, childish way. We went ice skating at the pond behind the elementary school, and she was quiet, her gloved hand barely holding mine. I kept waiting for the old May to surface, the one who'd teased me and raced me to the pier, and when she didn't, I took it personally.
"You've changed," I said, as we walked back to the cottage. Dead leaves scraped across the sidewalk. The streetlights buzzed and flickered. She stopped. The color drained out of her face so fast I thought she might faint. "Yeah," she said. "I have. I liked you better before. I don't know why I said it. I knew it wasn't true even as the words left my mouth. But I was angry at the world, and she was the only person in front of me, so I let it stand." When she looked at me for a long moment, and then her shoulders squared in this small, dignified way that broke my heart.
"I think we should stop," she said. "Whatever this is, I can't be the person who makes you happy, Horace. Not if this is what happy looks like on you." I let her walk away. I stood there in the cold and let her walk away. And then I got in my car and drove back to the city without saying goodbye.
For a while, I tried to become the kind of person who moves on cleanly. I deleted our photos. I went to bars with coworkers and let them set me up with people I didn't like. I started running in the mornings, though I hated every minute of it. Still, I saw her everywhere. A girl on the subway with the same slope to her shoulders, a voice in a coffee shop that caught the same vowels, a flash of pale hair on a crowded sidewalk. Each time, my chest would tighten, and I'd have to stand very still until the feeling passed.
I told myself it was just the mind being lazy, matching patterns, but the explanations never made it hurt less. My uncle moved to the city that spring. He gave up the Victorian and took an apartment near the harbor, and with him went my last reason to visit Long Beach. I told myself it was better this way. A clean break. The Newtons and their ivy-covered cottage became something I filed away under people I used to know, and I did my best not to open that drawer.
Then, late that summer, the firm decided to bring on a new partner. I happened to know a guy, an old college acquaintance named Patrick, who had family money and too much free time. I suggested him to my boss, who told me to drive down to Monksbury and pitch him in person before some other company got to him. The commission on a successful recruitment would be enough to make a real difference, maybe even enough for a deposit on a better apartment. I bought the idea without much enthusiasm and bought the ticket.
Monksbury was a beach town 3 hours south, the kind of place with mini-golf and clam shacks and rental cottages with names painted on driftwood signs. I had been there once or twice in college. I bought a ticket for the afternoon regional train and boarded with a folder of projections I hadn't really looked at.
The car was nearly empty. 2 men in polo shirts sat across the aisle, talking about their kids' swim lessons and the price of rental cottages. The air conditioning wheezed. Outside, the sky was cloudless and the fields were the color of wheat. I tried to read a PDF on my phone, but the words kept sliding off the screen. I was thinking about May again, the way I always did when I had nothing else to occupy me. I wondered if she was still in Long Beach, if she'd finished the degree she'd talked about, if she still wore that oversized blue cardigan.
Train slowed as it approached Long Beach. I hadn't expected to stop there. The express usually passed through. But there was some signal issue ahead, and we crept onto the platform at a walking pace. I looked up without thinking, and there she was, May. She stood near the station house, a white wool shawl wrapped loosely around her head and shoulders, her face pale and thin but unmistakable. She was looking directly at me, and she was smiling.
It wasn't the careful smile she'd given me in December. It was the old smile, bright and impatient, the one that used to mean she was about to dare me into something stupid. She lifted one hand and beckoned. I didn't think. I grabbed my bag, pushed past the man in the aisle, and wrenched the door open. The conductor shouted something. I jumped down onto the platform, landing hard enough to jar my ankle. The station master, an older guy in a reflective vest, stared at me.
The platform was empty. The white shawl flickered at the corner of my vision, and then it was gone. I stood there, breathing hard, the sun beating down on the concrete. A seagull cried overhead. The train sat motionless for another few seconds, long enough for me to notice the 2 men in polo shirts pressed against the window, watching me with identical expressions of confusion. Then the doors closed and the train pulled away, gathering speed toward Monksbury.
I walked the half-mile to Fern Street with my heart knocking against my ribs. The road was the same as I remembered, shaded by oak trees, lined with cottages that leaned slightly toward the sidewalk. Someone had mowed recently, and the air smelled of cut grass and gardenias. The cottage looked the same, ivy everywhere, the porch swing hanging crooked, the wind chime by the door making a thin, broken sound, but the windows were dark. I rang the bell. The sound echoed inside like a stone dropped down a well. No one came. I knocked, then rang again.
A woman and a young woman stood on the sidewalk, both in fleece jackets, walking a small dog. The younger one squinted at me. Horace. It was Amy Reed. She'd gone to high school with May, and I'd met her a few times at bonfires on the beach. Yeah, I said. Hi. I was looking for May. Amy exchanged a glance with her mother. They moved, she said. In the spring. They're in Richmond now. Richmond. May's been really sick. Pneumonia, I think, or something with her lungs. Her mom didn't give a lot of details. She paused. You didn't know?
I saw her, I said. Just now, at the station. Amy looked at me carefully. The way you look at someone who might be drunk or grief-stricken. That can't be right, Horace. She's been in Richmond for months. I pulled out my phone and searched for Charlotte Newton. There was a number listed under a Richmond address, an old landline from some directory I didn't remember adding. I called it from the station parking lot, and Charlotte answered on the third ring. Her voice was wary until I said my name, and then it went soft with something like relief.
A silence. Then, you need to come here. Tonight if you can. I rented a car and drove the 4 hours to Richmond with the windows down and the radio off. The highway was flat and dark, and I kept seeing the white shawl at the edge of my headlights, disappearing every time I tried to look directly at it. Charlotte met me at the door of a brick townhouse on a quiet street. She looked older than she had a year ago, or maybe just more tired. She didn't hug me, she just stepped aside and let me in. She's asleep, Charlotte said.
We sat in her kitchen with mugs of tea. Neither of us drank. The clock on the microwave clicked. A ceiling fan turned overhead, stirring the warm air without cooling it. She's been ill since March, Charlotte said. Not pneumonia, something slower. She wouldn't eat. She wouldn't sleep. The doctors kept saying it was stress, depression, that she needed time. She wasn't getting better. She was fading. Charlotte's eyes were red. She pressed her palms flat against the table.
I know why, she said. Or at least I know part of it. She never got over you, Horace. She tried. God, she tried. But you were in everything. A song on the radio, a place we drove past. She'd go quiet for hours and then say something like, I wonder if he's warm enough in that apartment. It broke her down. We thought moving would help. It didn't. I didn't know, I said. No, Charlotte said, you didn't. And I'm not blaming you for all of it, but you should have known.
She told me about the move, the new doctors, the brief improvement and then the slide backward. Then she told me about yesterday. 5 o'clock. She was sitting by the bedroom window. It was hot and still, the kind of afternoon where the air feels like it's waiting for something. She had that white shawl of hers, Mom's old one, wrapped around her shoulders. She said she was going to nap there, with the window open. I told her it would get cold. She said she didn't care. Charlotte stopped, sipped her tea, set it down.
She fell asleep fast, too fast. After a while she started talking in her sleep. I couldn't make out most of it, but then I heard your name, clear as anything, Horace. Then she smiled. She smiled like I hadn't seen her smile in a year. A few seconds later she woke up and grabbed my hands. Charlotte's voice dropped.
She said she dreamed she'd been given a warning. She didn't know what the danger was, only that it was coming for you, and that she had to reach you. She dreamed she was standing on the platform at Long Beach in her shawl, and a train was pulling in. She saw you through the window. She beckoned. You got off. And then she woke up. The kitchen was very quiet. I could hear a car pass on the street outside.
She was different after that, Charlotte said. Lighter. She ate dinner. She slept through the night. This morning she said, I think I'll see him soon. I didn't know what to think. I thought it was just a dream, making her feel better. But then you called. I told her what had happened at the station. I told her about the white shawl, the smile, the beckoning hand. Charlotte listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. You got off the train, she said. Yes. Thank God.
She led me upstairs. The bedroom was small and warm, lit by a single lamp. May lay under a thin quilt, her hair fanned across the pillow. She was pale, but her breathing was steady. The white shawl was folded over the back of a chair near the window, where the streetlight fell across it in a pale rectangle. Charlotte stepped back into the hall and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed. May's eyes opened. She looked at me without surprise, the way you look at someone who's been in the room all along.
I know. She smiled, and her fingers found mine. I was there. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again, the notifications stacking up in the dark. I knew what they would say. The train. The track. The thing that had happened while I was standing on a platform in Long Beach, watching empty air.
I pulled the phone out and turned it face down on the nightstand. May's hand was cold in mine. The white shawl hung over the chair, still as a held breath. I didn't wake Charlotte. I didn't check the news. I just sat there in the half-dark, holding on, and waited for morning.
The story closes here, but the quiet does not. Another night waits on the shelf, its pages already yellowing. When the light is low again, we will return. For now, let the window hold the dark. Let the mirror hold only you. Sleep well, late reader.